Dan O'Connell, Dave Isler, and a group called Crippled Fingers, who's also part of a bluegrass group over in Jamestown. They'll be playing today. Bill and I will be playing a couple times. Yesterday we had the Bonnie Lock Fiddlers and Bill Ward, a gentleman named Oliver Roberto, a young man from Infinity over in Jamestown. So it's been a lot of fun. We've lots of tents, as Reed said, so come on down. What a wonderful day. The rain is holding, so it's kind of nice down there.
And bring an umbrella.
Bring an umbrella, sure.
A lot of people do.
It's pretty dry. The ground is pretty solid over there. Okay, now, below. I don't know about you, Reed. I know you talk about government all the time, but I want to talk about something else. You know, I like to watch sci-fi, and that's sort of a joke in our family, because I like to watch all that paranormal stuff. But you know, I was thinking on the way over here today that the monsters and all this stuff we see on those shows, that's just a pale reflection of the monsters that really do exist in society today. And I'm not going to even name these individuals and give them the courtesy and the energy, but I just want to talk about things in general. We had a situation at a college where a coach was molesting young boys. People, that guy didn't act alone. This guy that shot up the theater up in Colorado, somebody had to know what was going on. So where I'm going with all this is there's monsters amongst us. If someone had said something the first time that individual touched a kid, no cover up. I don't care what it's worth. To destroy that many lives you can't even put a cost on that. That's just absolutely horrid. So what my advice is, if grandparents, aunts, and uncles are listening, a child comes up to you and says something or acts differently, look into it. I always tell kids that I work with, you keep telling an adult until someone listens to you. So be that adult and then do something about it. Just don't stand by and say, oh, that's just him, he's funny or she's funny. The guy in Colorado, okay, they said he was this guy that was a loner and stuff like that. He's got a family. He must have grown up somewhere along the line. He worked with people at the college. You see something weird, report it. What's the worst that can happen? You could be wrong. The third thing I want to talk about is we talk about monsters and things in Alien. Right now at the Arts and Crafts Festival, my club, the Rotary Club, is collecting pennies. We're not asking for dollars, just pennies and nickels and dimes to put out one more monster, and that's polio. And Reed, I gotta tell you, I didn't really know that much about polio until I saw some videos at Rotary functions and so forth. We got it down to about 300 cases a year in the whole world. Bill Gates Foundation is matching dollar for Rotary. So folks, if you're over and you see us, drop a couple nickels or dimes in there. Help us out. Back to you, Reed.
Thank you. Polio has turned out to make a big return. It's rampant in some areas now, and so we got to stomp that out. It cripples too many people. As far as that crazy guy who was under psychiatric care at the time, they might have known, in Colorado, who shot up the theater. And of course that brought up all the demagogues say, we need more gun control. Baloney, but it had nothing to do with guns. It's a nut, a crazy guy. You know, they blew up the half of Oklahoma building, the government building there, killing hundreds of people with fertilizer. I mean, these guys will figure out what to do. In the meantime, I'd like to have my gun, thank you very much. Okay, I don't even need an AK-47, but then they say, well, it's a repeater. Any repeater got to be illegal. And the most 22 rifles are repeaters, or shotguns, some of them, you know. So let's lay off this gun control baloney, and let's have nut control. That's what we need. As John pointed out, somebody must have known something along the way. Got a guest here, DoughHouck, and Doug knows the score. He's been here before. He comes over once a year and talks about his new book. He talks about old things, new things, fun things, and he's certainly a well-versed gentleman. He teaches in the university level, even though he's technically retired from school and everything, but he still works hard at it. And Doug lives in Westfield in the summer, and he lives in Florida in the winter, and most of the rest of the year, I might add. He and his wife love the temperature up here. Chautauqua County, as you know, is the most sweet. As the French said when they came through, and the French wrote in their annals, this is the Garden of Eden. DoughHouck, you're on. Tell us. Oh, tell us first of all, where do you come from?
Where do I come from? I actually come from the town of Arkwright over near Forestville.
Arkwright.
Yeah.
I heard of Arkwright.
I grew up there as a kid. Went to school, graduated from the Forestville High School. A few years back, actually, a couple of years ago.
Yeah?
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Then you came back and taught in the area, right?
Yeah, well, I graduated from high school and got involved went to college at Fredonia and spent a few years at Fredonia and graduated from there and taught actually in Pine Valley Central School. Taught there for about 5 years. From there I went on to Williamsville High School outside of Buffalo. I spent about 3 years, 4 years at Williamsville, became a high school assistant principal. Then I moved into the city of Buffalo and I was a supervisor of curriculum in Buffalo for a while. Became a school superintendent, which was an interesting experience in a place called Franklinville over in Cattaraugus County. And then was a superintendent in Albion for about 10 years after that. And then finally I decided, okay, it took me a long time to figure it out, but being a school superintendent's a bad job. I eventually came to that conclusion. Went off to the state of Maine. I worked in the state of Maine. I was teaching at the University of Maine at Orono, involved also with a residential program for emotionally impaired kids. And then left Maine and went to the great state of Hawaii. And I was in the great state of Hawaii for about 10 years or so. Worked at various schools, ended up working at the government, with the legislature and the governor, what have you, in Hawaii, working in education.
You had a big position there.
Yeah, it was like the Department of Education in Hawaii is a bit different. It's not exactly like in the other 50 states. In the other 50 states, they have these local school districts or county school districts. But in the state of Hawaii, they just have one statewide district. And that's it.
One set of officials running?
One set of officials, one superintendent, what have you. And in the state of Hawaii, we had at that time 183,000 students in about 270 schools on 7 islands. And I ended up actually in about the number 3 position in the state.
Okay.
So
you had a lot of experience in education.
Yeah, and then I finally gave that up and came back to Westfield. I had a house and had a condo in Chautauqua, sold that, bought a house in Westfield, fixed up the house in Westfield, and then planned on spending about 6 months a year here, about 6 months a year in Florida. My wife is from Florida, and we bought a house down in Punta Gorda, Florida. And then I started teaching down there. At least they talked me into teaching. I went back to work. Went back to work at Edison State College. I teach there. Also teach at Barry University.
So you're very, very active. We got a couple of calls. You want to take a call?
Okay, sure.
Hey, caller, thank you for waiting.
Good morning. I was especially interested in your writing you did about the election in the mid-1800s.
Oh, we'll talk about that.
We'll be talking about that. Actually, I've written now, I've published 7 books.
7 books. Doug is a prolific writer. And,
yes, it sounds that way. Well, my question was, do you see any correlation between the politics of the mid-1800s and the politics today?
The politics today are probably a bit more civilized than what they were in the 1800s.
That's hard to believe, isn't it?
When Jackson actually ran for president in 1828, he had a sort of a Karl Rove at the time in 1828. It was Martin Van Buren who organized actually the Democratic Party. And when they ran Jackson for president, he had a lot of opposition, and one of the newspapers at the time said Andy Jackson is a jackass. And he was so happy, so enthralled with being called a jackass, that the donkey became the symbol of the Democratic Party.
It still is.
It still is, right.
Well, he was rather a...
yeah, so that's why... But at any rate...
as I understand it, his personality was rather... You did not want to cross him. I mean, he did not mince words.
Who, Andy Jackson?
Yes.
Well, Andy Jackson was a kind of a rough, rugged individual.
Exactly.
He grew up on the frontier. He got in a little bit of problem at the time he was running for the presidency because they found out that his wife had been married to somebody before, Rachel, and she assumed that the guy she was married to had apparently gone off into the frontier and never came back, so she figured he probably had and
So she's a
something
widow,
happened
eh?
to him. So she got married again. She married Andy Jackson. But while she was married to Andy Jackson, her first husband came back.
Oh, dear.
Which got to be a bit awkward.
Yes,
And they-
yes, I can imagine.
And they finally had to go through and get a divorce from the first husband, so like she maintained the marriage with Andy. But when Andy was running for president in 1828, they said he was an adulterer, and they made a whole big issue about that. And then finally, when he was elected, Rachel ended up having a heart attack before he actually got sworn in as president.
Oh, dear.
So it was a very bad situation. He came in as president and went through a lot of personal problems, what have you. But as I said, Martin Van Buren, who was like his Karl Rove at that time, organized the actual political party and changed the whole way of coming up with selecting presidents, actually. Up until 1828, if somebody wanted to run for president, they had to be nominated by one of the states. And in the 1820s, there really was only one functioning political party in the United States, the
that's what I was gonna
Democratic
ask
Republican
you.
Party.
I was going to ask. It wasn't like two parties where
No, there wasn't the opposition.
Right, right.
So what they tried to do is pull the nomination process away from the states. And Martin Van Buren in 1832 came up with creating the whole concept of a convention. And they created a national nominating convention. And Andy Jackson was renominated by the National Nominating Convention for the first time. Now later on, of course, Martin Van Buren becomes president after Andy Jackson serves his 2 terms. And then while he is president, they have the big crash of 1837, and they start calling him Martin Van Ruin, so he only had 1 term as president of the United States.
Now, as I recall, I'm leaving my age away a little bit, but the first convention thing I ever watched was in the very 1950, the mid, the first time. Well, anyways, the first one. Let's just go to the Kennedy one because it's the first one I really remember. And back then, conventions were a lot different back then than they are now.
The conventions up until probably, I would say, the 1970s, actually they would come through and actually come up with a candidate on the basis of what happened in the convention.
Right,
But when the primary system came into effect, it sort of did away with actually the real purpose for a convention.
They're not near as much fun. The conventions were really fun. The 2 I watched before the primary system started coming in, they were really a lot more fun.
Oh yeah, because you didn't know who was going to be the candidate until after the convention was over.
Right.
And they would go through a number of ballots before they actually came up with someone. But coming back to politics itself, I think politics came to an all-time low probably in the 1850s. In 1858, the new Republican Party came into power into the House of Representatives. They went through like 3 months trying to come up with a Speaker of the House because of the dissension taking place actually in the House of Representatives. And they finally got into a big fist fight on the floor of the House of Representatives.
A literal fist fight.
They were rolling and tumbling around, punching and pounding each other. And finally, I think it was the representative from Wisconsin or someplace, jumped on the representative from Louisiana. They were tumbling around on the floor, grabbed him by the hair, and yanked the hair off. And then as a result, everybody started laughing, and the big battle came to sort of an end. But the politics in the 1850s, there was a lot of dissension. The new Republican Party had come into being because there had been the Democratic Party for a number of years. When the Whig Party formed, it was simply a party formed in opposition to Andy Jackson type of thing. But when the Whig Party kind of fizzled out in the 1850s, and we had the Whigs, and we had the Know-Nothing Party, the American Party, and the American Party was set up primarily to restrict immigration. That was their major concern. But they had these secret cells sort of things, secret meetings, secret organizations. And they were told if you belong to the American Party, if somebody asks you about it, you say, I know nothing. So they called it the Know Nothing Party. Okay? And the Know Nothing Party, the American Party, actually was the first group involved in making the Washington Monument. They started it in the 1850s.